Picture this: Europe, a continent bound by common policies but fractured by differing ambitions. Spain, a pivotal player in this complex geopolitical chessboard, has made a daring move. But what exactly does this mean, and why has Europe's reaction been so quiet? Spain has dramatically altered its stance on China, a shift that has left Europe stunned and speechless. Few saw this coming, and it's far more than a simple trade dispute over electric vehicles. The stakes are higher. This move impacts global power dynamics, influence, and the future trajectory of Europe's relations with China. Spain's sudden break from the European Union's plan to impose hefty tariffs, up to 38%, on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, has sent shockwaves across the continent. Only weeks ago, such tariffs seemed inevitable. European car manufacturers were struggling to compete against China's booming EV market, with companies like BYD and NIO flooding the European market with affordable, high-quality cars. The tariffs were viewed as necessary to protect local car makers. So, why did Spain pull the plug? The answer could lie in Spain's growing economic reliance on China. Spain's trade with China has soared by 15% in the past year, and 7% of Spain's total exports are now bound for China, including valuable goods like machinery, electronics, and agricultural products. With such strong trade ties, it's clear that Spain has more to lose from a standoff with China than many other European nations. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez seems to be playing the long game, carefully balancing EU unity with the reality of Spain's dependence on China's vast market. Sánchez's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier this year was not just ceremonial. It was a strategic dialogue about trade agreements. Behind the handshake, Spain secured deeper economic cooperation with China. As a result, exports to China surged by 12% in early 2024. Spain's agricultural products, industrial machinery, and even some tech exports have seen a spike in demand. In the face of this growing trade momentum, Spain has managed to delay the EU's proposed tariffs by opposing them. Spain is effectively buying time for its domestic automotive industry to adjust to this new competitive reality. It's not just about cars. Spain's economic future is entwined with China's rise, making any disruption in this relationship potentially disastrous. In fact, Spain's foreign policy shift signals a deeper strategic alignment with China. The South China Morning Post recently described this as Spain's economic diplomacy, how Spain's economy has become increasingly intertwined with China's, from technology investments to agricultural imports. With this mounting economic dependency, a tariff war over EVs could have severe repercussions for Spain's broader economy. Now let's talk about Europe's automotive industry, a sector fighting for survival. Over the last decade, Europe has watched as its automotive giants, Volkswagen, Peugeot, and others, lost ground to China's burgeoning electric vehicle market. In 2023 alone, European car exports fell by 9%, while imports of Chinese EVs skyrocketed by 18%. This trend is even more alarming considering Chinese EVs aren't just flooding the market. They're outperforming European models in quality too. Chinese electric vehicles are gaining serious ground, outpacing. European competitors in key markets are facing pressure from Chinese brands, which are competing not only on price, but also on customer satisfaction. Recent reports indicate higher customer satisfaction ratings for Chinese EVs in Europe, compared to many local brands. To protect its manufacturers, the EU proposed tariffs on Chinese EVs to make them more expensive, and give European car makers a chance to catch up. However, Spain's refusal to back the tariff plan puts the entire strategy at risk, leaving the EU caught between protecting its car makers and managing its trade relationship with China. This decision could backfire on Spain, which is particularly vulnerable in automotive manufacturing and agriculture. As Europe's second-largest car producer, Spain focuses on mid-market models, which are directly threatened by China's cheaper, high-tech alternatives. A trade dispute could increase manufacturing costs, making Spanish cars less competitive globally. Spain's agricultural sector is also deeply tied to China, with 40% of its pork exports, valued at over $1.5 billion annually, going to China. A trade war could lead to retaliatory tariffs, devastating Spain's agricultural economy and harming farmers and workers. If China targets other Spanish agricultural exports like olive oil and wine, it could trigger a crisis in rural Spain, with dire consequences for thousands of workers, as warned by Professor Hanan Moreno, an agricultural economist at the University of Seville. Spain's opposition to the EU tariffs is a delicate balancing act. While potentially beneficial in the short term, it risks significant economic fallout for both car manufacturing and agricultural exports. Spain's strategy of deepening ties with China exposes it to potential retaliatory measures that could severely impact its economy. If China's market access is threatened, the effects on Spanish industries could be catastrophic. Spain is positioning itself as an intermediary between Europe and China. But the success of this strategy and its potential economic consequences remain to be seen. As Europe's automotive and agricultural sectors await the next move, the continent must address the shifting landscape of global trade and China's rising influence. The battle over luxury goods and technology between Europe and China is also heating up. China is known for its firm stance in trade disputes. If the EU imposes tariffs on Chinese EVs, China is likely to retaliate with countermeasures targeting key European industries, particularly luxury goods and technology. Europe's high-end brands rely heavily on affluent Chinese consumers, who accounted for nearly 30% of global luxury spending in 2023. A backlash from China could force these brands to drastically rethink their market strategies. Furthermore, Europe exports billions of euros worth of technology equipment to China annually, highlighting another vulnerable sector in a potential trade war. Partner, any disruption to this relationship would have severe consequences for the European economy. The EU's tariffs and China's response. China has the ability to disrupt entire industries if it feels cornered. European tariffs on Chinese EVs could trigger a trade war that Europe may not be prepared to handle. As noted by Elizabeth Brow, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, Germany's opposition to tariffs on Chinese EVs is rooted in its automotive industry. Giants like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz have substantial investments in China. In 2023, Volkswagen alone sold over 3.5 million vehicles in China, accounting for nearly 40% of its global sales. A loss of access to the Chinese market would devastate Germany's economy. In contrast, countries like France and Italy are less dependent on China for automotive exports and more focused on protecting their domestic markets. French President Emmanuel Macron has been a vocal advocate for tariffs, arguing that Europe must defend its workers from unfair competition. Europe must defend itself, he said in a recent speech covered by Le Figaro. The divisions within the EU. The divide between countries like Germany, France, and Italy highlights growing tensions within the EU. Germany, with its strong economic ties to China, is hesitant to escalate tensions, while France and Italy, feeling the brunt of Chinese competition, are pushing for stronger protectionist measures. Spain's decision to break from the EU's tariff proposal further exposes the fault lines in Europe. The EU is struggling to maintain a unified stance on China as individual countries prioritize their own economic interests. This division goes beyond trade. It's also a political issue. Europe finds itself at a crossroads, with some nations advocating for deeper integration and others pushing for a more flexible, nation-first approach. A recent Economist headline captured the growing rift. The Great European Divide. How China is driving a wedge between EU members. This dilemma will undoubtedly shape the future of Europe's relationship with China for years to come. The numbers speak for themselves. Let's break down the numbers. In 2023, China's trade surplus with the EU reached a staggering $400 billion. This imbalance is driven by Europe's high demand for Chinese goods like electronics, machinery, and EVs, while the Chinese market does not reciprocate with equal exports. This surplus is a growing concern for European leaders and gives China significant leverage in negotiations. As Europe becomes more dependent on Chinese imports, China gains more control over European economies. If China decides to tighten the economic noose, Europe's position becomes even more precarious. Spain, in particular, is trying to navigate this delicate balance, opting to prioritize dialogue over conflict, unlike France and Italy, which see China's growing dominance as a direct threat. Spain's strategic move. Spain's refusal to support the EU's tariff proposal is a calculated move. Spain is positioning itself as a bridge between Europe and China, aware of the significant economic benefits at stake. China is now Spain's third-largest trading partner, and exports to China increased by over 15% in 2023. Spanish industries like machinery, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals are benefiting from this growing trade relationship. But it's not just about trade. Chinese investment in Spain, particularly in technology, infrastructure, and renewable energy, is also on the rise in 2023. Chinese direct investment in Spain exceeded 5 billion EUR. Spain understands this investment is crucial for its long-term economic development. By refusing to back the EU's tariffs, Spain maintains a strategic position within the global trade network. Spain's government advocates for a more flexible, pragmatic approach to EU-China relations, aiming to carve out a leadership role that doesn't simply follow the directives of France or Germany. This position could define Spain's influence within the EU for years to come. The upcoming vote and the stakes, Spain's decision to oppose the proposed tariffs, has thrown the EU's plans into turmoil. The EU is preparing for a crucial vote on these tariffs, and Spain's position could change the outcome. With Germany already hesitant and Spain stepping back, the EU's unity on this issue is now in question. If the vote fails, it will send a message to Beijing that Europe is not unified on its approach to China. The consequences of this division could be significant for both the EU's internal cohesion and its negotiating power. If the tariffs are implemented, Spain and other dissenting countries will face potential economic retaliation from China. It's a high-stakes game that will test the EU's ability to navigate these complex trade dynamics. Global ramifications and the ripple effect. This conflict between Europe and China doesn't just affect the two regions. Its effects are felt globally. As China expands its Belt and Road Initiative, investing in countries across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, Europe risks losing influence if it isolates itself. China's increasing economic footprint will likely attract more willing partners in the developing world, shifting the balance of power. The ongoing trade tensions create ripple effects in markets worldwide, from raw materials in Africa to tech manufacturing in Southeast Asia. The global economy is undergoing a rapid transformation, and Spain's decision to challenge the EU on tariffs could have far-reaching implications for Europe's place in this shifting order. What lies ahead for Spain and Europe? Spain's refusal to back the EU's tariff proposal is more than an economic stance. It's a strategic gamble with long-term implications. As Spain navigates the delicate balance between competing economic interests, its role in shaping future EU-China relations will be crucial. The question remains, will Spain's decision to push for dialogue instead of confrontation strengthen its position within Europe, or will it deepen the rift within the EU? As Europe prepares to vote on the tariffs, the world will be watching closely. The outcome could shape the future of EU-China relations and, ultimately, the global economic landscape.